Cybersecurity for Beginners Career Advice. How to get started in cybersecurity free and cheap. Things that you can do today to get the ball rolling. Hi all. Okay, so we're going to go back to something we touched on in video 1, and that was this cheap computer thing on Amazon resale. So here's the link to Amazon resale. It's kind of tricky to find if you just go to Amazon, so that's why it's nice just to save the link. So we went over all this in video 1. We're going to go down to number 6 here. And we're going to touch on buying a desktop. Laptops are fine too, I'm just kind of preferential to desktops, That's pretty much what I've always used. So the video title, Cybersecurity, How to Study Hardware. How to buy a computer. Now we're talking used computers because they'll be cheaper. Of course, if you can buy a new one, if you can afford to buy a new one, do it. But it's really not necessary. If you buy the used ones, refurbished from Amazon, they've all been checked out, you got fresh software on them. That's all I've used for years, and they seem to work great. And usually I even have a spare sitting around. In case one goes bad, I just throw it out and I get out the other one. So PC is just a short way of saying personal computer. And in general, we're mainly talking Windows, Microsoft Windows computer, a PC. So on Amazon, do a search for this here. Desktop i7 32 RAM. That would be 32 gigs of RAM. Now, there's a lot of variables here, and we'll talk about those. But I just want to start off with what I recommend. The text from part 1. Amazon resale used to be called Amazon Warehouse, and they sell refurbished merchandise. They sell refurbished computers. Don't overlook your hometown computer shops and recycle centers. You got to be careful with old computers though. You never know when they're going to short out, cause a fire. That's why I think it's best just to go through Amazon. Then you know what you're getting. These small town computer shops, if the right person is running it, they could be really good. Especially if something goes wrong, just bring it back in and they'll fix it. So we're mainly talking getting a good used computer to run Microsoft Windows Pro. Version 10 is fine, but they're up to version 11, so I'd go with version 11. If you go to work somewhere, most likely they'll be using the newest version. Microsoft quit putting out the updates for Windows 10. So that's why I'm thinking most businesses have gone to 11. And then there's Microsoft Server. Microsoft Server would be the big one that businesses use. That's where the databases would be installed. So you use your Windows Pro computer to connect to the Windows Server and do your work. Lots of work can be done on your desktop, at your desk, but the data is usually stored on the server itself. So that's called client server. There's big server that handles all the important stuff. Then you use your desktop to connect to the server. And it's the same thing with Linux. Client server. You have the big Linux server and you connect to it from your Linux desktop. Now there's a lot of overlap there too. So on Amazon resale, search for i7 32 RAM. Okay, so i7 is like the speed. In general, there's good, better, best. Okay, good would be an i3. Better would be an i5. Okay, i3, i5s, they'd be great for 95% of what we're going to do. So if you see a good i5 for $100, grab it. I'm just saying i7 because I've always bought i7s. And if you're going to get into running servers, if you're going to run Windows Server or Linux Server, you want it to run fast. You don't want to be clicking on things and have to sit there and wait for it to do what it's going to do. Good, better, best. i3, i5, and i7. Your choice. i3 might be kind of slow, but I think for most things, searching the web and things like that, I think they'd be fine. If you're gonna go with the virtualization thing, create virtual computers on your desktop, I would definitely go with the i7. And then the 32 gigabyte of RAM, so that's a lot. 32 gig of RAM is a lot for just a desktop. 16 gig of RAM would be fine, but I'm thinking just in case you get into the virtualization, for another $20, go with the desktop that has 32 gigs of RAM. Here, I'll show you what I'm talking about. If I click on my taskbar here at the bottom and go to Task Manager, okay, that's the same thing if we click on Windows icon and go to Task Manager here. Same thing. Two ways to get to the same thing. And then we go to Performance tab. See, there's these tabs here at the top. Each one shows you something different. So we're on the Performance tab. And then we have these icons here on the side. This is showing us what our CPU is doing. You can see here I have an i7. I'm pretty sure it's an i7. And you can see I'm not really using much of the CPU. Just recording the video, clicking on a few text files. Here's the RAM. They call it memory. You can see here I have 16 gigs of RAM in this computer, and I'm using half of it just running Windows. So that's why I say if you're going to get into the virtualization, creating virtual machines, you're going to need more RAM. More RAM, your computer runs faster. This is my hard disk. This is where everything is stored. Your C colon. See here, C colon. Everything is stored here. So why do I bring that up? If you run out of RAM, let's say you start creating virtual machines. I know the concept might be a little foggy now, but I want you to kind of understand what you're buying. You have 16 gigs of RAM, right? You create at least 2 virtual machines because you want the 2 virtual machines to do something, to talk to each other, to experiment. Well, it's going to fill up this space. If you use more than 16 gigabytes of RAM, the computer doesn't stop working. It starts using the memory on your hard disk, on your C colon. So it's sending things back and forth. So that slows everything down. And you don't want that to happen. That's like last resort. So that's why it's good to have 32 gigs of RAM. I usually don't do the virtualization thing. I have multiple desktops set up in my basement. But I've taught the virtualization thing at college, and it's great, it works good, but there's definitely a learning curve. You have to kind of understand what you're setting up in order to make it run right in your head. You got to set up hard drive and memory and network and all this other stuff too. My point of view, it's easier just to buy a desktop. Computer's doing what it's going to do, and we're just working with the software on it. We don't have to worry about all that physical stuff. Just like driving a car. You get in a car and drive it. You don't care about all the physical stuff. You just want it to work. You're only using the driving part, right? Same with the computer. I'm kind of stretching it there, but I think you get the idea of where I'm coming from. Like when you bake a cake, you don't have to understand all of the intricate features of your oven. You just know you got to turn it on, heat it up, open the door, close the door. Okay. So we'll get into looking at the items on Amazon too, but I just want to go over some of the main items here, just to give you a heads up. So i7 is the speed of the CPU. Well, I don't really know if it's the speed. There's another number for speed. So let's see, what is i7? Okay, so if we go to ChatGPT, and I did a quick search, and it wrote this itself. I think I typed in i7 and it gave me a few choices. So it's I architecture, and it's saying what's new in 2024. So the I is Intel. i7 would be an Intel CPU, and it's the CPU architecture. Okay, and then it gives a bunch of technical information here. And then I came down here and I typed in what is i7. That's what I want to know, right? I've always thought of it as just the speed. So it says Intel Core i7 is high performance tier of Intel CPU processors. High performance tier, the i7. positioned above Core i5 and below Core i9. So there's an even faster one, i9. So here's the good part. What i7 means in plain English. i7 is designed for faster multitasking. You can switch between programs faster. From the web browser to Microsoft Word to some cybersecurity program, you can switch back and forth. More processing cores and threads. There's more things going on at the same time. High performance and demanding work. That's what I was saying with the virtual machines. You need a faster computer. And they're commonly used in gaming, photo, video editing, CAD. CAD is computer-aided drawing or drafting, programs they use to draw skyscrapers and cars and stuff like that. Heavy office multitasking. Excel, I guess they're talking about Excel, database, whatever you do in your business, Some servers and workstations, older models. And then there's a list here. So, I basically think of it as the speed. But you can see here there's a lot more to it. Okay? So, and then after the i7, there's another number. It's a number in like 1,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. That's the generation. And I basically think of that as like, well, what year did it come out? It's not a yearly thing, but like i7 3000 would be probably back around year 2000. So let's see what ChatGPT says about that. So here i7 is a tier, and then 2 of the 2600 would be the second generation. Came out 2011. Intel Core i7 12000. The 12th generation came out 2021. So i7 3000 2012, and then there's i5 12000 2022. So why does that matter? Because when you go to buy a PC, it's going to say i7 3000, i7 5000, and that'll give you a general idea of how old it is. So i3, i5, i7, i9 is the class. And then the first number after that is the generation. Tell me the exact CPU model, and I'll tell you how old it is, how fast it is. There's charts out on the web that you can see in the list how fast the computer is. Now, the faster the computer, the more it's going to cost. Okay? So I'm thinking, like, all of mine are 4000. i7 4000. They're all pretty old. We're talking at least, when I bought them maybe 2010, and they're still chugging along. There might be a couple new ones in there. If I have one go bad, I throw it out and I put in a new one. I think I've had 2 new ones since then. I have a couple here. So here, this one's kind of expensive. It's cheap for what it is, but I think for our purposes, $500 is kind of expensive. But here, see, i7 9000. And then this would be the speed. And they're all like 3 gigahertz, 3.5 gigahertz. They're all pretty much the same. 32 gig of RAM. Right? So those would be the main things. i7, and then a high generation. So that's that 9000th generation. That's why it costs a lot. The speed here, the 3 gigahertz, that's good. 32 gig of RAM. 32 gig of RAM is another thing that makes it cost more. And then 1 terabyte hard drive. That's your C colon. The SSD is solid state. A solid state would be like a thumb drive. There's nothing inside there spinning. Here, I'll show you what I'm talking about here. Well, here, let's just show it here. Picture of disk hard drive. It probably won't show me the inside. Okay, see here, the old-fashioned disk had this disk inside there, and this arm would move back and forth. So when you saved something to your computer, a text file or an email, this is writing data to this disk that's spinning. And see here, there's layers. See how there's different layers of disk? So that's the storage. This is actually your C colon. That's what your C colon is. It looks like this. If you open the computer, it just looks like a steel box. But inside of it, it's got these platters spinning. This would be hard disk, and this would be SSD disk, solid state. Solid state, there's no platters. It's just like your RAM. It's just like your thumb drive. It's not going to show me the interior. Oh, okay, here. Here's the interior. Here's the interior of a solid state drive. It's just a bunch of chips. There's no platters spinning. So the SSD is a new thing. They say the SSD is faster because it just writes data to the chip. It's faster because you don't have to wait for this thing to spin around and then the arm to write the data to the platter. But for our purposes, either or is great. I know I read an article a few years ago. They said the SSDs don't last as long. They burn out. I don't know if the same is true for the new ones. I'm sure there's been a lot of improvements. The 1000 number after the i7 is a generation. So go for at least 5000. Like I said, I'm using all 4000s. 16 gigabyte of RAM is great. But if you're gonna do the virtual machine stuff, I'd go for the 32 gig of RAM, just so you have enough. You can add RAM after you buy the machine. You know, you go out, you buy a RAM stick. What's a RAM stick? Right. Let's see if it shows us a picture. So you can go out and buy a RAM stick and insert that into your computer yourself. It's actually pretty easy. But, you know, that's not cheap these days either. And I just saw a video this morning that there's a shortage of RAM now because of all the AI computers are using up all the RAM. So price is probably going to go higher. But basically what happens is everything you see on your screen is running in RAM. It's running on these sticks. Okay, you open up a text file, it opens up on your RAM. You open up a web page, you're viewing it on your screen, but everything on the screen here is inside this RAM. So if you open 20 web pages, you might fill up your RAM. Follow me? So that's why it's good to have a lot of RAM. More RAM, the better. Let's say you go out, buy a computer with 16 gigs of RAM, that's a lot of RAM. Even 32 gigs, I think, would be considered small. You know, I'm sure some of these people in the gaming, they probably got 100 gigs of RAM easy. So let's see here. Just out of curiosity, let's say, how much RAM does a high level gaming PC have? Okay, so here it's saying 32 gig. Some will have 64 gig. 16 is okay. But you know what they do is they actually have two areas of RAM. We're kind of getting off topic here. But this might be misleading because inside the computer they have a separate card so like these are the high level video cards. You know, this card here plugs into your motherboard here, and then on this card there's more RAM. So the game is actually running on the video card and not on your computer's RAM. It's running in the RAM on the video card. So these video cards can be very expensive. We're talking hundreds of dollars. So here's a few. Here's one for $114. Here's one for $199. That's just for a card that you add to your computer. 6 gig of RAM. I think that's what that's saying here. Here's one with 8 gig of RAM. So the game is actually running on the card. So here's a card, $329, 12 gigabyte of RAM. What happens if your game isn't running fast, then things will lag a little bit. It won't be real fast. So what the gaming people do is they buy a real expensive card to make their computer run fast. And then there's actually built-in fans to keep the card cool. Okay, so we kind of got off track there. So I would say 16 gig is fine. But since we're getting into cyber security, more advanced topics, you might want to spend the extra $20 or so and go with the 32 gig of RAM. That's your choice. A DVD player. There's a DVD player. It also plays CDs, and this read-writable. You can read to it. You can write to it. The right part would be if you downloaded Linux. You downloaded the Linux software, and then you want to write it to a DVD. You create your own Linux DVD installer. So that's why you would want a writable one to install software. Something you have to be careful of. Lots of computers don't have DVD players anymore because they're thinking everything is downloaded now. You go to the App Store. You don't need a DVD player. Or you can do it off USB. You just do it off a USB stick. I still have a preference toward DVDs. It just makes it a lot easier. But then, you have to buy writable DVDs. They aren't cheap. And they only hold like 4 gigs a side or something like that. You might be able to get 8 gig blanks, but I think they use both sides. So that's why everything's just going to USBs. So something I added here is you can actually download Fedora Linux, install it on a USB drive, and boot from that USB drive. And we'll do that later. And then Kali Linux. That's the main Linux program people use for cybersecurity. You can download Kali, install it on a USB drive, boot your computer to that thumb drive, and you're running Kali Linux right off your thumb drive. The reason why they go to Kali is because it has all the cybersecurity apps pre-installed. It's ready for that job. If you go to another Linux, whatever it is, there's a lot of good versions of Linux. It may not have all the other cybersecurity apps installed, which is no big deal. You just install it yourself. But I think most people just go with Kali now if they know that's what they're going to do. So if you're going to buy a used computer now, I'd go with Windows 11 and go with the Pro because that has all of the features. If you go to work somewhere, you're going to be working with the Pro version. Windows 10 Pro that's what I'm using here. But there's no updates. They announced that there'll no longer be updates. So we talked about hard drive. Go with at least 1 terabyte. That's the size. 500 gigabyte is fine. I wouldn't go any smaller than that. 500 gig plus 500 gig is 1 terabyte. So I kind of consider 1 terabyte as like the standard now, which is huge. It's a huge hard drive. That's this thing here. You can see it's pretty Much More standard.